There are books that entertain, others that teach. And then there are those rare, almost mythical ones that refuse to remain on the outside. They infiltrate, take up space within the soul, and build a battlefield there. Crime and Punishment is one of them. Published in 1866, Crime and Punishment isn't just a classic of Russian literature. It's a harrowing journey through the soul of a man and, by extension, through the soul of us all. The protagonist, Rodion Raskolnikov, is a young student drowning in poverty, consumed by an idea that dangerously blends with arrogance. The belief that certain men stand above ordinary morality. Driven by this conviction, he commits a murder, not out of impulse, but as an experiment, almost like a living thesis. But what Dostoevsky gives us is not the story of a perfect crime. It's the psychological collapse of someone who tried to justify the unjustifiable. From the moment blood is spilled, the real story begins. A dizzying plunge into guilt, delusion, wounded pride, and the desperate attempt to escape oneself. It's not a crime novel. It's not a moral drama. It's a dark mirror where the reader is confronted with the most contradictory parts of themselves, even if they've never committed a crime. Because the punishment here doesn't come from the law. It comes from the conscience. And that, as we'll see, does not forgive easily. This isn't just a powerful read, it's a visceral experience. Anyone who goes through its pages with an open heart doesn't come out unscathed, because this is not a story you observe from afar, like someone admiring a painting. It's a story you live. And to live this story is to allow yourself to be pierced by something that has no intention of sparing anyone. Dostoevsky didn't write a book. He wrote an abyss, a mirror that stares back at you, offering no comfort of distance. Reading Crime and Punishment is like agreeing to a silent pact. You will follow Raskolnikov to the depths, whether or not you like what you'll discover about yourself. That's the brilliant trap. The protagonist isn't just a character. He's a symptom of a fragmented humanity that thinks too much, feels too much, rationalizes too much, and still acts as if it were possible to escape the consequences of one's inner chaos. While other works invite the reader to reflect, this one forces you to bleed a little. It tears away certainties, questions values, disturbs logic, and suffocates any attempt at neutrality. Because here, there is no comfort, no solid ground. There's a young man who commits a crime, but the true punishment doesn't come from the justice system. It comes from his own conscience. And in his lucid cruelty, Dostoevsky makes us realize that this conscience is universal. That all of us, at some point, have flirted with the idea of crossing certain lines. That all of us, in some moment, have believed we were above good and evil, even if only in thought. That's why Crime and Punishment isn't just a masterpiece. It's more than that, because it's not enough to admire it. You have to survive it, and once you do, you're no longer the same. The biggest changes in life don't always arrive with noise. Sometimes they slip in quietly, like a book you decide to read, without knowing it's about to break something inside you. Crime and Punishment is that kind of event, a turning point disguised as literature. When you choose to read it, there's almost always something in the air, a silent restlessness, a weariness of the obvious, a thirst for something that doesn't reek of surface-level comfort. Dostoevsky doesn't come to quench that thirst with answers. He offers something far more dangerous, the collapse of everything that once felt too certain. Few books have that kind of power. Most pass by. This one stays. It stays like a wound that never heals, like a question that refuses to rest, like a memory that won't fade. Because what's written there isn't just a story about crime, guilt, and redemption. It's a guided tour through the underground of the human soul. And once you've stepped into that underground, you can no longer pretend that the surface is enough. It's as if the reading opens an invisible crack in your mind. Nothing explodes. No one screams. But something essential shifts. That's why those who read Crime and Punishment at the right moment in life feel like something irreversible has passed through them. It's not an exaggeration. Because there are books that touch, and there are books that transform. And transformation, in this case, doesn't mean improving or evolving. It means being taken apart, questioning your own identity, your desires, your morality. The reader is pulled into a psychic storm where nothing is stable, and the work, quietly, fulfills its role without needing to shout. It becomes a kind of internal turning point. There's a before and after, even if no one else notices, only you. This transformation even changes how you read other works afterward. Everything feels smaller, more simplified, more adorned. Because Crime and Punishment rejects embellishment. It's raw, direct, caustic. It doesn't want to be pretty. It wants to be true. And truth, when it's not decorative, has the power to change entire trajectories, even if no one sees it, even if no one knows, even if everything seems the same on the outside. That's why so many readers can't just move on after closing the book. Something remains. Something vibrates in silence. Because this work doesn't just mark a rupture, it destabilizes. And not only because of its dark content, but because Dostoevsky knew that by writing about a shattered human soul, he would be touching the most intimate cracks in whoever reads it. Crime and Punishment is not literary entertainment, it's psychological confrontation. It's a mirror that doesn't reflect the image you wish to see, but the one you hide even from yourself. It's impossible to go through this story without feeling something shake inside. The discomfort doesn't just come from Raskolnikov's actions, but from what he represents. The constant doubt, the rationalization of the irrational, the impulse to transgress, followed by the inability to uphold that transgression. Everything in this story is unstable, and that instability seeps into the reader. Because even knowing it's fiction, the brain and the heart react as if it was something all too real. And it is. Because the anguish isn't invented, it's recognized. Reading this book is like experiencing a silent emotional earthquake. With every page, some certainty gets displaced, and the most disturbing part is realizing that, unlike other narratives, there's no solid ground here where reason can safely rest. Everything is uncertain, volatile, painfully human. There's no idealized hero or easily hateable villain. There's only confusion, suffering, and the desperate attempt to find meaning in the midst of it. And that's the truest thing literature can offer, the raw truth of the human condition. Dostoevsky invites us into this minefield without guarantees. And this courage to write chaos with such precision is not common. It's rare. That's why Crime and Punishment is not a book you read with your eyes alone. It's an experience that demands something almost no other work does. Deep emotional involvement, total surrender, and a willingness to face your own abyss. That's when the book becomes immense. Not because it teaches, but because it destabilizes. Not because it leads, but because it forces you to feel. And as that emotional involvement deepens, a new layer of discomfort reveals itself, the absence of certainty. Because if at first we turn to literature in search of meaning, a lesson, or at least a logic that might justify suffering, Crime and Punishment refuses to play that role. There are no redemptive morals handed over on a silver platter. No narrator to take us gently by the hand and explain what's right or wrong. On the contrary, what we find is an ethical vacuum, a murky territory where the questions weigh far more than any attempt at answers. And that's exactly where Dostoevsky sets himself apart from ordinary writers. He doesn't write to comfort, he writes to expose. He understands that the human soul is not a logical system, but a web of pulsating contradictions. And that's why the power of his work lies precisely in what it doesn't offer: ready-made moral judgment. Nothing here is tidy, easy, or digestible. And that creates a kind of vertigo, as if, by throwing us into this compassless world, he forces us to walk with our own feet, even without knowing where we're going. This vacuum is a faithful mirror of existence itself. We go through life, searching for answers, trying to label what is good or bad, right or wrong, worthy or shameful. But deep down, life never offers any of that with clarity. Raskolnikov's choices are questionable, yes, but how many times have we also chosen paths driven by ideas we pretend are noble, when in truth they hide pride, fear, or desperation. Dostoevsky doesn't point fingers. He watches. And he makes us watch too. Not others, but ourselves, in the place where our paradoxes live. The book leaves us suspended in a space where guilt isn't just punishment, and punishment isn't just guilt. Where pain isn't a tool for redemption, but an existential state. That's why so many readers, upon finishing the novel, struggle to explain it clearly. Because it doesn't settle into memory as a linear story. It lingers as an inner state, a discomfort that stays, an absence that provokes, a silence heavy with weight. And maybe that's what elevates Crime and Punishment into something greater than a masterpiece. Because it's not just an admirable work of art. It's an experience that rips the ground out from under the reader and leaves them there, standing among the rubble of their own ideas. It's that emptiness, that refusal to provide easy meaning, that makes it unforgettable, that transforms it into something you don't define. You feel it, something you don't interpret. You endure it. This refusal to offer ready-made meanings reaches its deepest point when we realize that not even pain, in this book, is dressed in lessons. There's something cruel, but also profoundly human, about the way Crime and Punishment portrays suffering. Most stories try to turn pain into learning, into redemption, into some form of personal growth. But Dostoevsky is in no rush. He understands that not all pain comes to teach. Sometimes it just comes, and it stays, and it tears through you. And that alone is already too much. Raskolnikov does not become a better man through suffering. He doesn't find enlightenment. He fragments. He descends into delirium. He drags himself through the ruins of his own mind, swinging between justification and remorse, between pride and self-loathing. And the reader is forced to follow him, not knowing what to do with the growing discomfort. The pain doesn't close any circles. It opens cracks. And that's what escapes the attention of rushed readers who try to turn the story into a moral tale. There is no lesson here. There is a fall. And there is permanence in the fall. That's what makes the reading so devastating, the absence of an emotional reward. There is no catharsis at the end, no happily ever after. There's a thick fog of ambiguity that hovers over everything. Because what's at stake is not just what Raskolnikov did, but what we all do with the parts of ourselves we don't want to face. The suffering in this book is not a bridge, it's a territory. And if the reader insists on crossing it, hoping to reach some better place, they'll get lost. Because there is no map, only a labyrinth. Dostoevsky shows us that the real punishment might be having to live with your own mind after crossing certain lines. There is no external court that compares to the slow, relentless torment of internal guilt. And that guilt doesn't educate us. It wears us down. It makes us fragile, inconsistent, unsteady. That's what makes the novel so disturbing. The courage to portray pain without makeup, without purpose, without redemption. Just pain in its rawest state. And it's this unfiltered, merciless portrait that makes the novel feel almost unbearably real. While other authors organize chaos to make it more digestible, Dostoevsky hands it over in its rawest form. And by doing so, he defies the entire logic of traditional literature, which often tries to give human suffering a purpose. Here, suffering is the center, and there is no promise it will turn into something useful. No guaranteed growth. And that forces us to look at our own pain with a different kind of honesty. One that doesn't require meaning, only presence. And perhaps what makes this presence of pain even more unbearable is the fact that it never walks alone. It comes accompanied by figures that don't offer comfort. They deepen the abyss. Because the characters in Crime and Punishment don't exist to represent simple ideas or fulfill functional roles in the plot. They are living, chaotic, unpredictable organisms. They don't serve the story serves them. And by doing this, Dostoevsky presents us with a rare kind of character. One that doesn't fit into easy explanations, that cannot be reduced to a symbol, that defies any attempt at interpretive control. Every figure that crosses Raskolnikov's path carries a disturbing ambivalence. Sonia, for example, is purity and submission, faith and resignation, but also pain and shadow. She isn't merely the moral counterpoint to the protagonist. She is the very enigma of human compassion in the face of the unforgivable. Porphyry, the investigator, is much more than a representative of justice. He is a cold, silent mirror of the conscience in motion, who doesn't need violence to reveal what lies hidden. And Raskolnikov himself, of course, never fits the mold of a typical criminal. He is cold and anguished, logical and delirious, arrogant and emotionally shattered, all at once. These figures do not let us rest. They don't behave like fictional characters because they feel made of the same matter we are: contradiction, ambiguity, tension. And that's why they dismantle our certainties, not just the protagonists, but ours. Each one carries within them a kind of silent accusation. We are all multiple, unstable, unpredictable. And when faced with these characters, we are forced to confront that multiplicity without filters, not as theory, but as sensation, as visceral discomfort. This is where the book becomes more than a stylistic exercise or a social critique. It turns into a psychic organism, pulsing with voices that weren't created to please, but to reveal. And what they reveal is always unsettling: that we don't truly know who we are, that morality is fragile, that faith is not simple, that guilt has layers, that love doesn't redeem, and that judgment is almost always unjust. The characters are not guides, they're fractured mirrors. And when you look into them, it's impossible not to see your own cracks reflected back. In most novels, the characters serve the plot. Here, it's the plot that bows to the complexity of each character. And that's why the work survives time, because it doesn't depend on style, or era, or context. It lives as long as there are people trying to understand themselves, and failing. As long as someone is trying to explain pain, guilt, love, or faith, and stumbling through contradictions. Because Crime and Punishment is not made of answers. It's made of people. And people, by definition, are chaos. And when these characters pierce us so deeply, something inevitable happens. We need to talk about it. We need to tell someone. We need to share the experience. Not like someone recommending a good book, but like someone who's witnessed an earthquake. Crime and Punishment is not the kind of work that ends with a final period. It spreads. It escapes through our mouths, our eyes, the restless silence that forms when we try to explain what we felt, and fail. Because this kind of reading doesn't stay inside, it demands release. Maybe that's why so many readers have come closer to one another through this book. It is paradoxically both solitary and collective. Solitary because it speaks to such intimate places, it feels like it's whispering directly to each person's unconscious. And collective because that whisper makes us the same: vulnerable, exposed, human. There's a kind of silent communion among those who've been touched by this text. They recognize each other in the way they avoid summarizing it, the way their voices drop, the way they use imprecise words to try and express something that cannot be explained, only felt. And that is rare. There are many brilliant works, many that impress, enchant, provoke intellectual admiration. But Crime and Punishment crosses that line. It produces a kind of unrest that becomes unbearable when it isn't shared, as if by keeping it inside, the reader might explode. Because it's too much, truly too much. And what is too much needs to find another body, another ear, an echo, even if it's just to say, I felt that too. Dostoevsky wrote something that overflows, and that overflow forces us to put into words what we don't even know how to name. It's as if the words become desperate attempts to give shape to an experience that has no clear outline. And that's not a flaw of the work, it's its glory. Because what wounds us deeply also connects us. What disarms us also humanizes us. And in provoking that movement, the book fulfills a purpose far beyond literature. It gives us back to ourselves, a little more aware of our own fragility. To talk about this classic isn't just to repeat its ideas, it's to try to organize your own internal collapse. It's to convert pain into language, uncertainty into sharing, silence into presence. And that need to speak is, at its core, the highest praise a book can receive. Because there are stories that end when the book is closed. But this one stays alive as long as there's someone still trying to understand what it did to them. And maybe it's precisely because it stays alive that this book never grows old. Because more than a finished narrative, it's a moral battlefield. A space where no certainty lasts for long, where every conviction is challenged, where every judgment returns as a question. Crime and Punishment is not a crime novel, nor a philosophical treatise, nor a redemptive fable. It's a territory under dispute, inside and outside the reader. And that ongoing battle is what makes it eternal. It doesn't matter how many decades pass, or how many literary styles come and go. There will always be something unbearably current about the way Dostoevsky forces us to confront the conflicts we pretend not to have. The fight between pride and humility, between justice and desire, between faith and nihilism, between the good we preach and the evil we practice in silence. These battles have no expiration date. They are what make us human, and what inevitably place us in front of literature's mirror. Reading Crime and Punishment is like accepting an invitation to that inner war. There are no shields, no shortcuts, no guaranteed victory. There is only the risk of thinking too much, of feeling too much, of realizing that the world cannot be neatly divided into right and wrong, that the human conscience is made of warring layers. That guilt can destroy us as much as the crime itself. That redemption might not even exist, or if it does, it exists only as a whisper, a fragile possibility that requires far more courage than the act of transgression itself. And that's why calling it a masterpiece feels too small, because that label, no matter how respectable, still reduces it to an aesthetic category. But Crime and Punishment doesn't want to be admired. It wants to be felt, lived, endured. It doesn't want to be classified. It wants to be confronted. Because it's not there to prove anything, or to teach, or to conclude. It's there to disturb, to ignite, to make sure the reader never again feels fully safe inside themselves. In the end, maybe that's its greatest power, remaining open, continuing to provoke questions where other books offer answers. And it's in that silence, loaded with conflict, in that space where everything gets tangled and nothing is resolved, that literature reveals its most brutal and most beautiful power. If you connected with this reflection, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay with me for the next video.